Let's move on to the second body paragraph then. Of course, what we're dealing with here is a sense of contrast. Just like in any discussion opinion or opinion discussion essay or any discussion essay, there's always a sense of contrast here. So you can almost always get away with writing however at the beginning of your second body paragraph. There are obviously other expressions that you can use as well, but as we haven't used however yet, I think it's a good idea to use it here. Now let's make sure that we quickly draw the reader's attention to the main theme of the paragraph. We should always try and make that clear as early as possible. So we're going to say the main advantages. Up here we said the negatives. Down here we're saying the main advantages of living in a house. So the main advantages of living in a house is that they are, again, always or just often. Are they often? Remember, try to avoid the generalization. They are often more spacious and more private. Now, hopefully, at least some of you have been watching this and thinking, he's made a mistake here. He's made a grammatical mistake. If you haven't noticed this, have a look through that sentence again and see if you can notice the mistake that I've included. I've included this mistake because it is often made. This is a common mistake because people forget that whether they're dealing with a singular subject or a plural subject, and then they modify the verb according to what they think it is, even though it might not actually be that. So if you look for a particular verb, it might be wrong here. Hopefully, you will have recognized it is this verb here. So we have the to be verb in the singular form, singular conjugation. That doesn't work. Why is that? We've got a house. Why should it not be his? Well, that's because our subject is not singular. It's not a house, but it's plural. This is our subject, the main advantages of living in a house. And that's plural, the main advantages. So we need to change is to are. So keep that in mind whenever you're writing your topic sentence, because it comes up quite a lot, particularly if you're in a listing format. So however, the main advantages of living in a house is that they are often more spacious and more private. You might be wondering why I've written more twice. The reason that I've done that is just to highlight that they are two separate advantages. It's not one advantage together. It's not more spacious and private, makes it sound like one advantage contained of two parts, but two separate advantages. This also makes it easier when we move on to the supporting sentence because we can now do this. Now, if we said more spacious and private, it still would work with regards to the former, but it wouldn't be quite so clear what we were referencing. Here, we've got two very distinct advantages because of the repetition of more. So it's not really repetition in a negative way, but in a positive way. So with regards to the former, houses, well, we've got multiple rooms. So often, tend to, usually, typically, it's another one we can use, typically have multiple rooms. What more could we say about this? Why are multiple rooms good? Let's say what they do. They allow, so they have multiple rooms to allow plenty of space. For what? What do we need to spend plenty of space for? We could say, well, for leisure. And what else do you do in a house? You relax. What's the noun of relax? Relaxation. So for leisure and relaxation. And we're going to add another non-defining relative clause in here. I think it's quite useful to just add a which, forces you to think about a little bit more information to develop the idea. What sort of people would this kind of accommodation be good for? Multiple rooms, space, leisure, relaxation, a single person living alone, maybe it doesn't matter so much, but certainly it'll be especially useful for families. And we know that families are usually composed of children, but we will just add that there just to further emphasize that point. So, which is especially useful for families with children. Now we need to move on to the private aspect. So here we wrote with regards to the former. How do you think we could start the next sentence, which will look at the more private aspect? How do you think we could start it? hopefully you're using some expression with the word latter. And I'm just going to say as for the latter. So as for the latter, what have we got here? Detached houses. Now, not all houses are detached, so we're just going to say at least in the case of. So not all of them, but certainly for detached houses, at least in the case of detached houses. Now we've got private. What's the noun? We can use privacy. Nice collocation will be greater. Greater privacy is possible because what happens to this noise? Now, a really good verb that collocates with the noun noise is carry, which sort of means that it travels over a distance. So noise carries. So noise does not carry through one wall and into the neighbouring house. We could say house. There's another word for accommodation. We could say just residence perhaps. So notice this, because we're in a house, the noise does not carry. The noise does carry through one wall and into a neighbouring flat because it's only separated by one wall. But here you've got like two separate walls. You've got the wall in our house and then the neighbouring residence's wall as well. So it's a nice way of phrasing that. Okay, now we're down into the alternatives again, and I think again, just like above, we can probably just fit both of these ideas into a single sentence. Remember, the main topic here is houses. It's not really flats, so we're just using flats to provide context and contrast, so we don't have to go into too much detail with flats. So up here we said contrast this with, what's another expression for contrasting? We could say a cohesive device here, conversely. We could say conversely. And then I like this, when we've got 2 points that we want to make together, we can use the not only but also structure. So not only are flats, apartments, whatever, generally, remember not always, generally smaller, but also. So you can see we're putting these 2 points together, not only this but also this. Not only flats, not only are flat. Also notice the word order here. If you're using the not only structure, the verb comes first and then the subject. So you use inversion when you're using not only. So not only are flats generally smaller, but also, in fact, hold on, let me change this around, but they are also. Notice the inversion doesn't apply to the second part. So you've got the inversion in the first part, but not the second. Here it's just normal. But they are also less private. Opposite of more private, less private. Also less private due to, what have we got here? Close proximity. Due to neighbours living in very close proximity. They tend to live very nearby. We just emphasise that point there. Okay, so that's the second body paragraph sorted. If we have a quick check on the word count, you can see we're probably already quite high here, unfortunately. 252. Well, we'll have to make sure that we have a very concise conclusion, so let's get on with that now. As always, we want to just start with a conclusion. Then we want to make sure that we are addressing 4 elements, like we mentioned in the introduction. This essay is really composed of 4 parts. The primary parts are the advantages and disadvantages of living in a house, but we do need to also talk about the advantages and disadvantages of living in a flat. Fortunately, as we talked about earlier, the advantage of living in a flat is the disadvantage of living in a house, and vice versa. So you don't really need to explicitly talk about lots of, each separate part, but we can just bring out the main points that we made in each of the paragraphs. And really, we've made 3 points altogether. We've made 1 main negative, and we've spoken of 2 main advantages, and that creates 1 main advantage of flats, and it creates 2 main disadvantages of apartments. So we don't have to go into too much detail. So what we'll say is, in conclusion, I think, I believe, I feel, I'm just going to go with I think, we'll keep it quite simple here. I think that the advantages of, now we're immediately here going to include what those advantages are. How could we paraphrase here? We've got spacious, so let's just go with the word space. and we've got private, so we'll just go with privacy just to make, we do already have these words, but I think it's better if we can at least paraphrase them from the topic sentence. Makes it a little bit less obvious. So the advantages of space and privacy that come with living in a house, keeping it nice and simple here, outweigh. Now, a lot of people would be telling me now that I should write a comma. There should be a comma here. But no, there is no need, because if you think about this, all of this remains your subject. It's a long subject, but notice it's just followed by the verb. So these advantages, if you made it referencing, you say these advantages outweigh. You wouldn't add a comma, so there's no need to add a comma here. In fact, you shouldn't, because it would be inaccurate. So the advantages of space and privacy that come with living in a house outweigh the disadvantages. And notice by writing this in the active voice, I managed to paraphrase what I had above with the passive. So I think the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, again very similar, of less security. And that's summarizing what we talked about in the first body paragraph. The disadvantages of less security in comparison with, and this is where we're really making sure we're addressing all parts of the task. Got compared with here, down here we're just going to say in comparison with, up here we said when compared to, so we're making sure that we're paraphrasing plenty, and in comparison with living in an apartment. You may be worrying about the amount of repetition here with the word house, with the word apartment, with the word flat. It's a good point to make. Yes, there is repetition here, but it's incredibly difficult to avoid without sounding forced. There are some nouns, particularly nouns in English, which are just very difficult to paraphrase because they contain an idea that can't really be put into any other words. You get a feel for this. The more that you practice, the more that you read, you get a feeling for when it is okay to repeat words and when it is okay to paraphrase and when it seems unnatural and when it seems natural. So just keep reading and you'll get a grip on this in time. I really do not feel that an examiner would penalize the repetition of house or apartment in this response, at least to how much we've done it here. We have paraphrased a little bit with referencing, with terms like accommodation, so there is demonstration that we're showing a wider range of vocabulary. I've mentioned it before, but paraphrasing is not your number one priority. It's a priority and it's important, but it's not your number one priority. Your number one priority is finishing the essay and communicating ideas with clarity and trying to make those ideas come across as naturally as possible. So that brings us to a close on this essay here. What I want you to take away most from this model answer, from this walkthrough, is the difference between a discussion opinion task and an opinion discussion task. Yes, they seem very similar, but there is quite a crucial difference. The format is the same. The introduction will paraphrase the task and contain your opinion. The first body paragraph looks at the side that you disagree with, so to speak, and the second body paragraph looks at the side that you agree with, so to speak, and the conclusion summarizes all of those points and restates your opinion. As you can see, the format is pretty much the same, but within the body, you need to remember that everything that you put forward is your own point of view. So make sure that in an opinion discussion task, you do not use language like those who believe. You can simply say just the negatives, the disadvantages, the reasons for or against. Okay, it's just the side that you think is weaker. So it's important that you frame everything from your own point of view, but that you format it like a discussion opinion task. And that position language also applies to the conclusion as well. And make sure that your introduction also features appropriate language like you can see above. If this is still a little bit unclear to you, don't hesitate to get in touch via the Q&A function and ask me any questions that should help to clarify this. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I hope in general though that you found this walkthrough useful, and I'll see you in the next one.